Indianapolis, June 26, 1977. 12,000 people packed into that arena, every single eye on Elvis Presley. And not one of them noticed what his hands were doing that night. Nobody did. Not his band, not his inner circle, not the cameras rolling just feet away from him. Not for nearly 50 years, until now. And what those hands were doing changes everything we thought we knew about that final night. The night everyone watched, but nobody saw. Market Square Arena, Indianapolis. The date was June 26, 1977. Elvis Presley walked out onto that stage at around 8:30 in the evening, and 12,000 people lost their minds. He was 42 years old. He was also, by almost every account from people who were there, not well. His face was puffy. His movements were slower than they used to be. There were moments mid-song where he leaned heavily on the microphone stand in a way that had nothing to do with performance. The people in the front rows could see it clearly. Some of them talked about it afterward. A few of them wrote about it years later. But here is the thing. Every single person in that building was watching his face, his expressions, the way his lip curled on certain notes, whether his eyes still had that particular intensity that had made him famous 20 years earlier. That is what people came to see. That is what they remembered walking out. Nobody was watching his hands, and that is where this story actually begins.
This is a song that I just recorded, and it's an old song called Unchained Melody. I had to play the piano.
The concert lasted roughly 2 hours. Elvis moved through the set list the way he always did in that final touring period, CC Rider to open, the crowd already on their feet before he hit the first chorus. I Got a Woman, Love Me. The hits came in waves, the way they always did. The band was tight. The backup singers were locked in. From a production standpoint, the show ran, but there was something else happening on that stage, something that had nothing to do with the set list. Between songs, during the instrumental breaks, in the quiet moments when the spotlight shifted and the audience noise swelled, and Elvis had a few seconds where nobody was directly focused on him. His hands were moving. Not randomly, not nervously. In a specific repeated pattern that has now been captured in footage that most people have never seen. We will get to exactly what that pattern was. But first, you need to understand why it took this long for anyone to notice. The Indianapolis concert has been analyzed for decades. Biographers have written about it. Documentarians have used clips from it. Fans have watched bootleg recordings of it thousands of times on the internet. It is one of the most examined final performances in music history, right alongside the last recordings of other artists who died, young or too soon. And every single analysis has focused on the same things: his voice, his weight, his stamina, whether he seemed medicated, whether he seemed present. The usual questions that follow a performer who was struggling in the final stretch of his life.
I'm glad these Vegas shows are done. I'm gonna have to tell the Colonel I can't do this no more.
The hands never came up, not once. In 50 years of scrutiny, nobody flagged what his hands were doing between those songs. Part of that is just human nature. We follow faces, we read eyes and mouths and expressions. Hands are peripheral. They register when someone is gesturing dramatically or playing an instrument, but in the quiet moments they become invisible. We stop seeing them. Part of it is also the quality of the available footage. The recordings that circulated for years were grainy, low resolution, often filmed from the upper tiers of the arena on handheld cameras. The kind of footage where you can make out a face, but the hands are just a blur of movement in bad light. That changed recently. Over the past few years, a number of recordings from the Indianapolis concert have been digitized at significantly higher resolution. Some of this came from private collectors. Some came from archival restoration projects. The footage that existed before is the same footage, but now you can actually see what is in it.
Take my whole life too, for I
And when researchers began going through that restored footage frame by frame, something kept appearing that did not fit the standard narrative of a man simply getting through a difficult show: his left hand. During a quiet instrumental passage early in the set, roughly 20 minutes in, somewhere in the stretch between the third and fourth songs, Elvis pressed his fingers together and drew his hand slowly toward his chest. Not a gesture aimed at the crowd, not a performing move. Something smaller than that, something private. He did it once, and the moment passed, and the song came back in, and the crowd surged, and nobody in that arena reacted because nobody saw it. But it happened again. Later in the set, same gesture, same slow, deliberate movement. Fingers together, hand drawing inward toward the chest. Then a third time, then a fourth. 4 times across roughly 2 hours of performance. Always in the quiet moments. Always when the attention of the room was elsewhere.
If you hear me, get my fingers caught in the keys back here, you know what it is.
Now, a single gesture means nothing on its own. People move their hands for 1,000 reasons. A muscle cramp, a nervous habit, an unconscious tic that a performer develops over years on stage. But 4 times, in the same specific pattern, in the same kinds of moments throughout the night. That is not a tic. That is not random. What it actually is, where that gesture comes from, and what it means to someone with Elvis Presley's specific background and history, is the part of this story that reframes everything. And that is exactly where we are going next. 50 years of looking at the wrong thing.
I don't know how much longer I can do this, boys.
Easy now, Elvis. We'll get you in the car.
Feels like I left every bit of me on that stage tonight.
You did great. Just a couple more steps.
Lord help me.
6 weeks after Indianapolis, Elvis Presley was dead. August 16th, 1977. He was found at Graceland in the afternoon. He was 42 years old. The world stopped. Radio stations interrupted their programming. Television anchors broke down on air. Walter Cronkite delivered the news with the kind of weight he usually reserved for presidents and wars.
That happened. And then when he told me that he was dead, it was like waking up from a nightmare.
And almost immediately, the analysis began. What killed him? What went wrong? How did it get this bad without anyone stopping it? Those were the questions that dominated everything in the weeks and months after his death. They are still, in many ways, the questions that dominate how people talk about Elvis today. The 1977 tour became Exhibit A in that conversation, and Indianapolis, as the final stop, became the most examined piece of evidence. Journalists pulled the footage. Biographers requested access to concert recordings. Fans who had been in that arena started giving interviews. A picture emerged quickly, and it was not a flattering one. Elvis was described as exhausted, over-medicated, physically deteriorating, a man being propped up by a touring machine that had no off switch. That narrative took hold fast. And once a narrative takes hold, it shapes everything that comes after it. Every journalist who wrote about that final concert approached it through the same lens. Every documentarian who cut together footage from Indianapolis was selecting clips that supported the same story: the stumbles, the forgotten lyrics, the moments where he seemed to drift mid-song. Those were the details that got used, because those were the details that fit. Nobody was looking for anything else. There was no reason to. Here's the problem with that. When you already know how a story ends, you stop looking for anything that complicates it. You find what you are looking for, and you stop there. It is not dishonesty. It is just how human attention works. We are pattern-completing machines. We see what we expect to see. The hand gestures did not fit the pattern. So, for 50 years, nobody saw them. There is also a practical reason they went unnoticed for so long. The footage from Indianapolis that circulated publicly for decades was not good. We are talking about recordings made on consumer-grade equipment in a large indoor arena in 1977. Low light, long distance, constant crowd movement. The kind of footage where you can tell Elvis is on stage, but the finer details dissolve into grain and shadow. Bootleg recordings of that concert have been traded among collectors since the late 70s. Some of them have been uploaded online countless times over the past 20 years. People have watched them obsessively, but watching blurry footage obsessively is not the same as being able to see what is actually in it. The digitization changed that. Starting around 2021, a small number of private collectors and archival groups began putting serious resources into restoring footage from Elvis's final touring years. The technology available now, frame stabilization, resolution enhancement, light correction, is genuinely extraordinary compared to anything that existed even 10 years ago. Footage that looked like a smeared watercolor in 2005 can now be cleaned up to the point where you can read the expressions on the faces of musicians standing 20 feet behind Elvis on stage. That is not an exaggeration. That is what the technology actually does. One researcher working through restored Indianapolis footage, a person with a background in performance studies and a long-standing interest in Elvis's later career, was not looking for hand gestures. That is worth stating clearly. This was not someone who sat down with a theory and went hunting for evidence to support it. They were doing a general review of the restored material, cataloging what was newly visible that had not been documented before.
Now, Charlie, you gotta make it your mind, son. You gotta hold the microphone, put the scarf on, hold the ring.
The gesture appeared in the first hour of footage they reviewed. They noted it, moved on, saw it again 20 minutes later, flagged it. By the time they reached the end of the recording, it had appeared 4 times, always in the same form, always in the same type of moment. They went back to the beginning and watched the whole thing again, specifically tracking the hands. The pattern held.
I gotta do this first. This is a song that I just recorded, and it's an old song called Unchained Melody. I had to play.
Now, here is the question that needs answering before we go any further. Could this just be a coincidence? 4 instances of a similar hand movement over 2 hours. Is that actually significant? Or is this a case of someone finding a pattern because they started looking for one? It is a fair question, and the answer lies not in the footage itself, but in what that specific gesture actually means. Because once you understand where it comes from, the tradition it belongs to, the context in which Elvis would have learned it and used it, the coincidence argument falls apart completely.
It's a combination of country music and gospel and rhythm and blues all combined is what it really was.
Elvis Presley grew up in the Assembly of God Church in Tupelo, Mississippi. He was not casually religious. He was formed by that church. The music, the movement, the physical vocabulary of Pentecostal worship ran through everything he did on stage, from the earliest Sun Records recordings all the way to Indianapolis. And in that tradition, the gesture his hands made that night has a very specific meaning. That is the next piece of this, and it is the piece that changes everything. What that gesture actually means. Tupelo, Mississippi, 1935. Elvis Aaron Presley was born into a family with almost nothing. No money, no stability, one constant, the church. The first Assembly of God on Adams Street in Tupelo was not a quiet, formal, sit-in-the-pew kind of congregation. It was loud, physical, emotionally raw in a way that made outsiders uncomfortable and insiders feel completely alive. People sang until their voices broke. They raised their hands. They wept openly. They moved their bodies in ways that the more reserved Protestant denominations of the same era would have considered borderline scandalous. Elvis was there every Sunday, from the time he could walk. His mother Gladys took him religiously, and that word is not a figure of speech. For the Presley family, the Assembly of God was not a social obligation or a Sunday morning routine. It was the center of everything. It was where you brought your grief and your gratitude and your fear. It was where you learned that the body itself could be an instrument of worship, not just the voice. That is the environment where Elvis Presley learned what music was for. Before Sun Records, before Ed Sullivan, before any of it. He learned it in that church, watching grown adults surrender themselves completely to something larger than themselves. And in that tradition, physical gestures are not decorations. They carry meaning. Specific, learned, understood meaning that every member of that congregation would recognize without needing it explained. The gesture that appears 4 times in the Indianapolis footage, fingers pressed together, hand drawn slowly toward the chest, has a name in Pentecostal practice. It is called a gathering gesture. The theology behind it is straightforward. You are symbolically drawing God's presence toward yourself, pulling grace inward. It is an act of private surrender, not performed for anyone watching. It is something you do when words are not enough, and you need to communicate something to God that cannot be said out loud. It is not a stage move. it was never meant to be seen, which is exactly why it appearing 4 times during a public concert performance is so striking. Elvis was not doing it for the crowd. The crowd was not even looking at him when he did it. He was doing it in the gaps, the in-between moments, the seconds when the band was carrying the song and the spotlight had shifted, and he had a few heartbeats to himself inside a room of 12,000 people. He was praying, quietly, physically, in the only private language he had available to him at that moment. Now some people will hear that and immediately push back. Elvis had a complicated relationship with religion in his later years. That is true. He drifted from the Assembly of God as his life expanded into something the church never could have anticipated. He explored other traditions. He read widely, Eastern philosophy, numerology, New Age spirituality. He was not, by 1977, a straightforward church-going man. But here is what the people who knew him best have said, consistently, across decades of interviews. When things got hard, genuinely hard, not just professionally difficult, but personally dark, Elvis went back to the beginning. Not to Graceland, not to the people around him, to the faith he had learned as a small boy in Tupelo, to gospel music, to prayer, to the physical vocabulary of the church.
Country music and gospel and rhythm and blues all combined is what it really was. As a child, I was influenced by all of that.
His longtime friend and gospel music partner, J.D. Sumner, spoke about this more than once. He described Elvis in his final years as someone who had never stopped believing, even when his life looked nothing like belief. Someone who returned to gospel not as a career move, but as a genuine need. Elvis told him directly, more than once, that gospel was the only music that made him feel clean. That word, clean. It is a specific word with specific meaning in Pentecostal theology. It means forgiven, restored, returned to a state of grace after a period of wandering.
Very much a part of his life. You take every night before he went on the stage, he would have us come in.
So when you place that gathering gesture back into context, a man formed by this tradition, using its physical language in private moments during what turned out to be his final public performance, the picture that emerges is not of someone falling apart on stage. It is of someone reaching for something, actively, deliberately, 4 times across 2 hours. In the quiet moments when nobody was watching, Elvis Presley pressed his fingers together and drew his hand toward his chest. 4 times he pulled Grace inward. And there is one more layer to this that takes the whole thing further, because the left hand tells one story, but the right hand, in 2 separate moments during that same concert, was doing something entirely different. Something that people standing near the front of the stage that night noticed without understanding what they were seeing. Something that multiple witnesses, interviewed separately and years apart, described in almost identical language without any of them apparently knowing the others had said the same thing. The right hand was not gathering, it was giving. And the difference between those 2 gestures, one pulling inward, one extending outward, is the difference between a man receiving something and a man offering something. What Elvis was offering that night, and to whom, is the part of this story that nobody has put together until now. The other hand, and the moment that stops you, cold. There is a moment roughly 55 minutes into the Indianapolis concert that researchers flagged before they even got to the hand analysis. Not because of what Elvis was doing, because of what the front row did. Watch the restored footage carefully at that mark. The crowd is loud, moving, completely absorbed in the performance. And then something happens near the stage that causes a small cluster of people in the first few rows to go still. Not startled, not confused, still in a different way. The way people go still when they feel something they were not expecting to feel. Elvis had extended his right hand toward them, not a wave. Not the kind of broad, sweeping gesture a performer throws at the back of the arena to make 15,000 people feel included. This was low, directed, palm facing down, fingers slightly spread, arm extended at roughly hip height, held for 3, maybe 4 seconds. Then it dropped back to his side and the song continued and the moment passed. Most people in that building missed it entirely. The cameras caught it at an angle. In the original footage, it looks like nothing, just a hand moving through the frame. In the restored version, you can see exactly what it was. The second time it happened was closer to the end of the set. Different song, different moment in the performance, but the same gesture. Right hand, low, palm down, extended toward the audience, held briefly, then withdrawn. 2 instances, both captured, both distinct from anything else he did with his hands during that concert. Now here is where it gets interesting, because this gesture also has a specific history, and it does not come from the showman tradition. It does not come from the performance vocabulary Elvis built over 20 years of touring. It comes from the same place as the other one, the church. In Pentecostal and broader charismatic Christian traditions, an outstretched hand with the palm facing downward is an act of blessing. A pastor does it over a congregation. A prayer leader does it over someone who has come forward for healing. It is not casual, it carries weight. The person doing it is understood to be channeling something beyond themselves toward the people in front of them. Elvis would have seen this gesture performed hundreds of times before he ever set foot on a stage. He would have felt it directed at him as a child, sitting in that Tupelo congregation. It was part of the physical language he absorbed before he had words for any of it. On a concert stage, surrounded by 12,000 people, with the lights and the band and the noise of a full arena production, it should have looked completely out of place. It did not. That is the thing that keeps stopping researchers who have looked at this footage. It looked completely natural, like something he had always been doing and simply never done in public before. 3 witnesses who were seated in the front section of Market Square Arena that night have spoken about this moment in interviews conducted at different times and in completely different contexts. None of them appear to have been in contact with each other. None of them framed it the same way, but all 3 described the same essential experience. One woman, interviewed for a local Indianapolis retrospective in 2004, said she remembered Elvis reaching toward them and feeling inexplicably like he was saying goodbye. She laughed slightly when she said it, the way people laugh when they know something sounds irrational. But she did not take it back. A man who had been standing near the stage barrier described it as the most personal moment he had ever experienced at a concert. He said Elvis was not looking at the crowd generally. He was looking at specific people, moving his gaze slowly across the front rows as his hand stayed extended. The third account came from a woman who had attended multiple Elvis concerts throughout the 70s. She said, Indianapolis felt different from the first song, and that moment with the hand, she described it simply. She said it felt like a priest, 3 people, 3 separate interviews, 3 descriptions that, without any of them using the same words, are describing the same thing. An act of blessing directed at the people closest to him on the last night he ever performed. Now, place that next to the left hand gestures. The gathering, the pulling inward, the private act of receiving grace. You have 2 completely different movements happening across the same 2-hour performance. One hand drawing something in, the other hand sending something out. In the theology Elvis grew up with, that is not a contradiction. It is a complete act. You receive and then you give. You are filled and then you pour out. It is the entire logic of Pentecostal worship condensed into physical movement. The question that has been sitting underneath this entire story, whether any of this was conscious, whether Elvis knew on some level what that night was, becomes almost impossible to answer cleanly when you look at both hands together. Because what you are looking at does not resemble a man getting through a show. It resembles a man who had already made his peace, who was present in that arena not just as a performer, but as something closer to a witness, to himself, to the people in front of him, and to whatever he believed was waiting on the other side of all of it. His closest circle felt something that week, and a few of them have never stopped talking about it. What his closest circle knew and never said. 3 days before Indianapolis, Elvis was in Cincinnati, June 23, 1977. Another arena, another crowd, another night of the same touring machine grinding forward. But something about Cincinnati was different, not the performance. What happened after? Elvis did not go straight back to the hotel. He asked his road manager to drive him around the city for a while. No destination, no reason given. Just driving through Cincinnati at midnight while the crew packed up the gear and the crowd filed out into the summer night. His road manager mentioned this in an interview years later. He said Elvis barely spoke during the drive. He looked out the window. At one point he asked to stop near a church. Not to go in, just to stop. They sat outside it for a few minutes. Then Elvis said, okay, and they drove back. That is a strange thing for a man in the middle of a touring schedule to do. Strange enough that the road manager remembered it clearly decades later and still could not fully explain it. But it fits, because the people who were closest to Elvis in those final weeks have left behind a trail of accounts that, taken individually, seem like isolated anecdotes. Put them together, and they point in one direction. Charlie Hodge had been with Elvis since the Army, 1958. They had been friends for nearly 20 years by the time Indianapolis came around. He traveled with Elvis, performed with him on stage, handed him water and scarves during shows.
I remember one night when I was sitting upstairs with Elvis in his bedroom, and it was one of those nights when
He was as close to Elvis as anyone outside his immediate family. Hodge said in multiple interviews that the final weeks of the tour felt quieter than usual. Not in terms of noise, the shows were as loud as they had always been. Quieter in terms of Elvis himself. He said Elvis had stopped complaining about the schedule, about how he felt physically, about the things that had been wearing him down for months. The low-level friction that is always present on a long tour just stopped.
And all the time when Elvis was talking, he'd be stretching his hand.
Hodge did not know what to make of it at the time. In retrospect, he said it felt like Elvis had put something down, some weight he had been carrying, like a decision had been made internally, and everything that followed was calmer because of it. J.D. Sumner noticed something similar. He led Elvis's gospel quartet, the Stamps, and he knew Elvis's relationship with faith as well as anyone. He recalled that in the final days of that tour, Elvis kept returning to one specific gospel song during sound checks, not a song that was on the set list, just something he would play privately, alone at the piano, before the crew was fully set up and the evening's work had officially started. The song was Where No One Stands Alone, a hymn about surrender, about reaching the end of what you can carry by yourself and finally letting go of it. Sumner said Elvis played it slowly, did not sing all the words, just played it and sat with it, on at least 3 separate occasions in the final week of the tour. Now add to that the account from Elvis's cousin Billy Smith, one of the few people who stayed at Graceland during the gaps between tour legs and saw Elvis in genuinely private moments. Billy has said in interviews that Elvis called him the night before the Indianapolis show. Not unusual, they spoke regularly. But Billy remembered that call specifically because of how Elvis ended it. He said goodbye instead of goodnight. Billy did not register it as significant in the moment. It was only afterward, after everything that followed in the weeks to come, that the word landed differently in his memory. He has mentioned it carefully, without over-dramatizing it. Just, that was the word Elvis used. Goodbye, when he normally would have said good night or see you soon, or some version of that. One word. But Billy Smith has carried it for nearly 50 years. Here is the question that needs addressing. Is it possible that all of these accounts, the midnight drive, the quiet on the road, the hymn at the piano, the word goodbye, are simply the result of people looking back at the final weeks of someone's life and finding meaning that was not there in the moment? Yes, that is absolutely possible. Hindsight is a powerful, distorting lens. When someone dies, especially suddenly, the people who love them go back through every recent memory looking for signs they missed. Sometimes they find real ones. Sometimes they construct them from ordinary moments that only feel significant because of what came after. But here's the thing. The hand gestures in the Indianapolis footage exist independently of anyone's memory. They are not recollections shaped by grief. They are not stories that have softened or sharpened over time. They are in the footage, frame by frame, time-stamped, visible. And they align with everything these people are describing. The gathering gesture, the blessing extended toward the front rows, the hymn about surrender played alone at the piano 3 nights before, the midnight stop outside a church in Cincinnati, the word goodbye instead of goodnight. These are not the same story told in different ways. They are different stories that happen to end in the same place. And that place is Indianapolis, June 26th. The last 2 hours of the last night. What happened in that arena, understood fully, was not a man falling apart at the end. It was something much harder to name than that. The goodbye nobody recognized in time. The last song Elvis Presley ever performed in front of a live audience was Can't Help Falling in Love. He had closed with it for years. It was the signal. The moment the crowd knew the night was ending, the lights would shift, the tempo would slow, and Elvis would move through those final verses with a kind of unhurried certainty that only comes from singing a song 1,000 times and meaning it every single one. Indianapolis was no different, except for the hands. His left hand, the one that had made that gathering gesture 4 times across the previous 2 hours, was pressed flat against his chest for almost the entire final song, not gripping the microphone, not gesturing toward the crowd. Flat against his sternum, fingers spread, held there like something he was trying to keep from leaving. His right hand held the microphone, but in the final chorus, the last minute of the last song of the last concert, he shifted. The right hand dropped the microphone slightly, letting the stand take the weight, and extended outward one more time. Low, palm down, the same gesture he had used twice earlier in the night. He held it through the final verse. Then, the song ended. The crowd erupted. Elvis said, "Thank you and God bless you," and walked off the stage. He never walked back onto one. Now, here is what makes that closing sequence land differently, once you have watched the whole night with fresh eyes. The "Can't Help Falling in Love" performance in Indianapolis has been described by people who were there as unusually slow, more deliberate than normal. A few music journalists who reviewed the concert at the time noted that he seemed to be savoring it, though they framed that as sentiment rather than anything more significant. Savoring is one word for it, but watch his body during that final performance and another word comes up: present. He was completely, entirely present in a way that the earlier parts of the concert, where he seemed to be managing his physical discomfort, did not always suggest, the voice held. That is documented. For a man who had been struggling vocally throughout the tour, the final song in Indianapolis was one of the stronger vocal performances of his final period. People who have analyzed recordings from that entire year mark it as notable. His pianist, Tony Brown, who toured with Elvis in that final period and has spoken about Indianapolis in several interviews over the years, said, "The end of that show felt different from other closings. He struggled to articulate exactly why. He said Elvis walked off the stage without the usual restlessness, without the immediate deflation that often followed a performance, that particular exhaustion of someone who has been performing through pain and is finally allowed to stop. He said Elvis walked off calm. That word keeps appearing in accounts from people who were with him that night. Calm. From someone who had been anything but calm for most of the preceding months. Billy Smith's account of the phone call the night before, the word goodbye instead of goodnight. Here is the fuller context that matters. Billy has said that during that same call, Elvis told him he was tired, not in a complaining way. Billy was specific about that distinction. He said Elvis had complained about being tired many times over the years, the way anyone does when a schedule is relentless and the body is struggling. This was different. He said it the way you say something when you are simply reporting a fact. "I am tired, Billy. I think I am just tired." Billy told him to get some rest after Indianapolis. Come home, sleep for a week. They would talk properly when he was back at Graceland. Elvis said goodbye and hung up. 52 days later, he was gone. The question this entire story has been building toward is not really about the hand gestures on their own. It is about what they mean when you place them inside everything else. The midnight drive past the church in Cincinnati. The hymn about surrender played alone at the piano. The calm that his closest people noticed and could not explain. The word goodbye. And then the final performance, both hands telling the same story in different directions. One receiving, one giving, one holding something in, and one letting something go. There are 2 ways to read all of that. The first is coincidence. Grief-shaped memory layered over footage that has been overanalyzed by people who loved him and wanted to find meaning in the ending. The second is that Elvis Presley, whether consciously or through something he could not have fully articulated, was closing a circle on that stage in Indianapolis. That the gathering gesture and the blessing and the flat hand pressed against his chest during the final song were not random. That they were the private language of a man who had grown up in a church that taught him the body could say what words could not. That he was not just ending a concert, he was ending something larger, and in the only way available to him, surrounded by 12,000 people with cameras rolling and nowhere private to go. He did it with his hands. Nobody recognized it in time, but it was always there, waiting in the footage, waiting for someone to finally look at the right thing. And now you have. Nearly 50 years, thousands of hours of footage analyzed, countless books written, and the answer was never in his voice or his face or the stories people told afterward. It was in his hands the whole time. Two gestures, one pulling grace inward, one sending it outward. A man raised in a church that taught him the body speaks. When words run out, and on the last night of his life, in front of an audience, it spoke.